Okay. Did you have fun playing baseball? How did you play?
Did I have fun playing baseball?
You can zoom in on this.
Well, of course I had fun playing baseball. We had to play baseball in a pasture. And I may have told you this story before.
But this is for your biography.
There were cows in the pasture. We shared the pasture with the cows when we played baseball. And I was playing center field one time, and a boy hit the ball way over my head, and I ran out to get it, and it landed by a cow, and guess what?
Ate it?
The cow gulped it down and swallowed it. And I couldn't get the ball. And pretty soon, guess what happened?
Got a home run.
No, the cow regurgitated the ball and spit the ball back out on the ground. And then I had to make up my mind whether I wanted to pick up that rather unpleasant ball
Or risk
or
a
let
home
the
run.
boy get a home run. So that's just one of the experiences I had playing ball.
I think we have one of those mittens.
Mitts.
So, do you want to know what happened? I picked the ball up and threw it back to the infield, but the boy got a home run anyway because the cow delayed me just long enough for the boy to get a home run.
To get to third base.
So you
probably.
did release it?
Hmm?
That was kind of, but that was.
So that's how it was playing baseball when you shared the field with the cows.
I,
So, how was you like, how did you get the ball from the cow?
How did I get the ball from the cow?
the cow
The cow
regurgitated
gave
it
the ball back to me. The cow spit the ball out
because it
on
tasted
the ground.
because it tasted bad to it. Ugh.
No.
Well, the cow, I think, realized that that was not something that it wanted to really swallow.
So, it spit the ball out for it to not let the person go to a home run.
But he
it
already got
probably
it.
took you a long time to.
Well, all the time this is happening, the boy who hit the ball is running around the bases. The first base, the second base, the third base,
And then
I'm waiting to
home
hit
plate.
the ball. Anyway, just one little funny thing that happened while I was a little boy playing ball in the pasture.
I have another question.
Wait, let me ask one.
Okay, you ask.
What did you learn about in school?
What did I learn about in school?
You're cutting off his head. Pay attention.
School was quite a bit different then than it is now.
Cool.
In
Got this.
elementary school, which was right here at White Church School, we learned basically what they used to call the 3 R's. Have you ever heard of the 3 R's?
Nope.
Well, they called them reading, writing, and arithmetic.
Meaning math.
Meaning
I thought
math.
writing started with a W.
Well, it does, and arithmetic starts with an A, arithmetic, but
What's
they called it the 3 R's. So basically,
What's SEAR?
that's what we learned about in school. We had to learn multiplication tables,
In what grade?
and we called them tutums,
Tudums.
because we had to stand in front of the class and we had to recite tutums 1 is 2, tutums 2 is 4, tutums 3 is 6, 2 is 2.
Oh, so you had to recite all the 2 times.
And we had to go up to 12.
Ooh, that's easy.
And we had to stand in front of the class and be able to recite those. And in reading, I can't remember not being able to read. I was able to read long before I came to school because I had an older sister who was 2 years older than I. And when she would come home from school, we would sit down and we would have school, and we would go over everything that she did that day. So she was 6 years old and I was 4 years old. So when I was 4 years old, she was telling me all about the first grade. So when I became 6 years old and came to school in the first grade, I already knew how to read, and I could read quite well. And I knew how to write. So I was way ahead of
Everybody else.
quite a few of the children, yes.
When did you learn to drive?
When did I learn to drive? I learned to drive when I was about 12 years old.
What?
Okay, that's the answer.
I was helping some people bring in some hay, a crop of hay out in the field. And they were hauling, these men were hauling the hay on a big old truck. And I had been working on the baler, and the baler went to one side of the field, and the man said to me, "Can you run back to the other side of the field and bring that truck over here?" Well, I had never driven a truck before, but I said, "Oh yes, I can do that." So I went running over to the truck, and I managed to get the truck started, and I managed to get it in gear, and back then they didn't have like automatic transmissions. You had to use the clutch and shift the gears and do all these things to drive a vehicle. I managed to find a gear that made the truck go forward, and I drove the truck across the field it's probably about a quarter of a mile. I drove it very, very slowly and brought it over to the man. And from that time on,
You knew how to drive.
I knew how to drive because most of my driving back then, in the early part, was in the fields where there was no traffic to worry about. My father had a pickup truck, and one time I drove it into the cornfield to do something, and one of the wheels slid off into a ditch and I got stuck. So I had to walk back to my house and get my father, and he came up, and he was such a strong, powerful man. Do you know how he got me out?
1 second.
He picked up the back of the pickup truck and simply moved it out of the ditch. He could pick up the truck.
He was that strong?
He was that strong.
What?
Anyway, that's how I learned to drive.
Oh. One more thing.
Hold on, I have a question for you.
When you had to crash, did you ever crash? Did you ever get a car accident or something?
In a car accident?
Yeah.
Well,
Not when I was younger and driving back then in the fields. No, I didn't. Now, I had a couple of car accidents later on. One when I was in high school, when it really could have been very serious, and I was lucky and didn't get hurt very bad. But a man ran through a stop sign and plowed right into me at the side of my car, and he didn't even slow down, and he really tore my car up. But fortunately, I didn't get hurt.
It must have been on the opposite side of the driver's side.
Well, actually it was not. It was on the driver's side. But he hit just a little bit behind where I was sitting.
Ooh, so the passenger seat. But you
And
didn't
turned
have
my
any.
car around.
No.
Spun my car around. But
he hit behind the driver.
that's the only time I've been very lucky.
Oh, wait, hold on.
No, at the rear, on
Who's
the
next?
driver's side. Oh,
I am.
no, you asked a question.
How about this man? He hasn't asked anything yet.
Oh, yeah.
You have a question?
And then me, then wait.
No,
Then
blame
you.
me. I only asked one question, really.
You've asked 2.
Okay.
Somebody else take.
I'll do it.
You got a car when you were 18 years old.
Did what?
Just hold it like that. So focus on. Okay.
Say it again.
You just show them how to
Say it loud.
No, it's okay.
Did you go harder in school when you were doing 11? Did you have any fun? Or when you were 18 years old?
Did I have any friends?
Oh, fun. He said fun.
Did
Oh,
you have
fun?
fun being 11?
Did I have fun being 11? I really did. I had fun. Actually, something happened when I was 11 years old that was, now let's think a minute. I was born in, what year, remember when I was born?
18.
No, not 18,
1920.
1930.
Oh, I was 10 off.
So when I was 11 years old, what year was it?
Okay, so go 11 years from 1930. It was 1941.
And you wouldn't remember something that happened in 1941 that made a big change on how we lived our lives and how we got along. Something very, very important.
So World War II?
World War II began in 1941.
Hold on, I have one thing.
And that's when Pearl Harbor was attacked and we were involved in World War II.
Whoa. That would be
So
our whole entire state.
everything changed for us at that time. And if some of you have been in my lunch groups before, you've seen some of the ration books that I brought where I showed you that
Coffee.
you had to have a stamp by coffee or sugar or a tire for your car or gasoline for your car. So everything became different. The school, you know what we did here at the school? We collected scrap metal. And probably pretty close to where this room is now, or maybe a little bit that direction. We had a huge pile of scrap metal that was probably as big as this room.
What?
Because everybody went out through the farmland, and a lot of times the farmers would have an old worn out piece of equipment and they would just take it down in a ditch on their property and leave it.
So you guys were
And we
allowed
would
to-
go pick up all that stuff, and some of the men who had trucks would go help us haul it back,
to school?
and we would bring it, and then they would come and pick up this big load of scrap metal, take it away, melt it down into steel, and use it to make
Guns, tanks, bullets.
Guns are made out of
trucks,
steel. It's only trucks and vehicles.
tanks, airplanes.
Everything, including
Whatever they needed.
airplane engines.
We also had a big box with a lid on it that had several containers in it, and we collected cooking fat. Back then, a lot of people cooked with animal fat, lard, and they saved it all, and we gathered it up, and every week or so a man would come around and collect it because they used it in the ammunition plants. It was used in the manufacture of bullets.
What? That would be cool.
And one of the things I got to do, there was a company down in Kansas City, Kansas called Harry Darby and Company that had a place right down by the river, and they built what they called LSTs, landing ship tanks, and they were vehicles that came off of a big ship and carried war materials into shore.
Oh, I know what those are. They can swim on top of the water.
Right, and I got to take a ride in one up up the Kaw River to where the Kaw River meets the Missouri River and then turn around and come back.
Was it a
Because we had
submarine?
collected scrap metal that helped build some of those. So everything was different when I was 11.
Buddy.
Everything changed. You couldn't buy a pair of shoes. You couldn't buy a new basketball to play with on the school ground, because all that material was used for what we called the war effort. And a lot of people, friends and people that we knew, uncles and cousins, were drafted into the Army and had to go away to war. So everything changed. It was very different. And
It must have been terrible for you.
well, it wasn't so terrible.
No, like people that you knew going into.
Well,
the
people that
service.
we knew, yes, went away. But all of us boys, I could name the type of aircraft, every type of aircraft that the U.S. military had.
Air Force used.
P-38s, P-39, P-40, P-51, P-47, Bell Airacobra, Lockheed Lightning, P-40 Tomahawk, P-51 Mustang.
That's the best.
I could remember all of those, and we also memorized the silhouette, because no one was sure that our country wasn't going to be attacked. We could memorize the silhouette of every enemy airplane. The German Messerschmitt, the German Focke-Wulf, the German Stuka,
That was a
the Japanese Zero, the Mitsubishi. We knew how that airplane looked in the sky.
So you could know if you were going to be attacked. Fortunately, I
Well-
think that didn't happen.
Fortunately, it didn't happen.
Oh, thank goodness.
But it's interesting that you mentioned 11 years old, because that was the year that a lot of things changed, not only in my life, but in everyone's life. And then about, let's see, when was the war over? 1941, 1944.
The Japanese tried to take over Alaska.
Suddenly, everything got back, the war was over, the soldiers all began to come home, and everything got back to, pretty much back to normal.
So
You could even buy a new car then when they came back, but there wasn't enough metal.
To make a lot of them.
And so the first cars that they were made in 1945 and 6 came out with a wooden bumper.
wooden.
They didn't have enough metal to put a metal bumper on them, so they took a big wooden plank and they bolted it to the front of the car. And when you bought a car with a wooden bumper, the promise was that as soon as we get a metal bumper, bring your car back and we'll replace this wooden board.
Man, that must have been neat.
Well,
Did you get the middle bumper for free?
totally different. Anyway, it's interesting that you asked that, because I lived through a pretty historic time in the nation's history, and that was World War II.
That was really awesome of you.
So, I could talk for a long time about that. Who else?
I have a question. What was a hard time for you?
What was a hard time? When I was little, you mean?
Sure.
When I was a boy, for example, when I was going to White Church grade school?
Yes. Wait, Calvin, he's asking about your question.
Is that what you mean, when I was your age growing up?
Yes, what was a hard time for you during
A hard time? You know, I can't remember any really hard times. we were all quite poor. But we didn't really know it because it was Depression time and everyone was poor. So we just thought poor was the way that the world was. And I really didn't notice it until I went to high school. Here at White Church School, it was a small school. We were all pretty much the same. Came from poor, small farmer families. But when I went to high school, all of a sudden I realized now I'm with a group of people who are not that poor. They had better clothes than I did. They had a little money in their pocket, which I didn't have. Some of them even had a car to drive to school. So I realized suddenly, wow, there's another world out here. You know, these people aren't that poor. So then my goal became to make sure that I was no longer poor.
So you helped your family, but you probably stayed away from school for
So-
a little bit.
My goal then was to find something to do to earn a living so that I could break out of being poor. I finally realized that I was poor. Up until that time, I hadn't realized that I was poor. So, and maybe that was the hardest time for me.
Willie, you have a question?
You know that time you were telling us about you driving a milk truck and your cousin?
Well, I remember that. My father drove a milk truck and delivered milk door to door. And one time my father got sick and he couldn't drive the milk truck, and so my uncle came to this high school where I and my cousin were in school and talked to the principal and said, I have to have these two boys come out of school because they are the ones who know this milk route and they have to deliver the milk today. So my cousin and I got out of school, got in the old milk truck, and it had sleeted real heavily, a lot of sleet, and it had piled up that deep on the ground. It was kind of slick and kind of bad to get around. But here we went. We loaded the milk truck up with milk, and away we went, driving through downtown, and we were both like freshmen in high school.
What was your cousin's name?
My cousin's name was Frank.
Yeah.
And his last name was, you want to know his last name?
Sure.
His last name was Bigham, B-I-G-H-A-M. And his B-I-G-H-A-M. His father owned the property where your school teacher's home was. And that was my father's cousin. Anyway, we went out and delivered milk to where the houses we thought were the ones that took the milk. And all we did was take a bottle of milk, take it up to the door, sit it on the doorstep. And then hopefully, if it was the right place, the owner would come out and get the milk, wash the bottle. The next day they would put the bottle out with the money inside the bottle to pay for the milk. And we were delivering that milk for exactly 10 cents a quart, 1 dime for a quart of milk brought to your door. Well, anyway, we made it through that day, and that was a hard day because it was hard work. And we had to do it the next day because my father still wasn't well enough to do it.
Wait, how long was your dad sick? How long was your dad sick?
Oh, no more than 2 or 3 days. My father didn't get sick very often. But when we went the second day, we realized that we had left the milk at some of the wrong houses because the weather was cold, and you know, when milk freezes, it expands, and in the glass bottle, the milk would push up and push the cap off the bottle, and there'd be a column of frozen milk sticking up above the bottle. And we drove around, and as we began to look, we'd see, oh, there's some frozen bottles on that porch, so we left that at the wrong house. Oh, there's some more over there. Oh, look at that. Frozen bottles over there. We left that at the wrong house. So it was quite an adventure for two, I don't know how old we were. How old are you in the 9th grade? 13? But anyway, we got it taken care of. And then my father got well, and he got everything straightened out and back to normal.
And then you guys went back to school.
And we went back to school. What else?
Any other questions?
Wait, do you have any more?
Can I say one that I didn't get to write down?
Sure.
Like, what did you do for fun, like as a hobby?
What did I do for fun? When I was a small boy, you mean?
Like, when you were...
I'm not sure you'll believe some of the things we used to do. Now keep in mind, we had no television.
What?
We had no video games. We had nothing of that nature. The only thing we had to entertain ourselves was
Radio?
a book, a radio. But whenever the weather was good, if it wasn't raining, we were outside. And we climbed trees. We used to hunt squirrels by climbing up a tree where we'd see a squirrel nest up in a tree. Well, one of my friends was a wonderful tree climber, and he would climb clear to the top of that tree and shake that nest, and the squirrel would run out of the nest, and the rest of us would be on the ground with a club. And the squirrel would jump, and I've seen him jump from the top of the tree and hit the ground and not be hurt. And then we would run and try to
Whack it.
hit the squirrel with a club before it could run away.
Whack-a-mole, whack-a-mole. Whack a squirrel, whack a squirrel.
And at nighttime, we would roam through the woods, and not far over this direction, there was a grove of persimmon trees. You know what a persimmon tree is?
No, we never heard of those.
Well, a persimmon is a wild fruit that grows. And they're good to eat, but you have to wait until they're fully ripe. If you ever bite into a persimmon before it's ripe, it puckers your mouth up like, ooh, terrible. Anyway, we would go to the persimmon grove and look up in the tree, and there would be 2 or 3 possums because they liked persimmons. Well, once again, up the tree, shake the possum out of the tree. Possum would hit the ground, grab him by the tail, put him in a gunny sack, and we would catch 2 or 3 possums at night and take them home, and we'd build a big cage out of everything we could find. And we at one time had maybe 10 or 12 possums that we had caught in that cage. Now, I don't know why we caught them, but it was just something, an adventure for us.
You didn't eat them?
No, but I have eaten a possum.
Did they taste good?
No.
Oh, come on. I was going to try one. If it
No,
tasted good.
No. Really, they are edible and they have to be cooked properly, but they taste a lot like pork,
What?
except they have to be cooked and cooked and cooked because they're a very fat creature. And they're not something that I would want on my regular diet at all. But anyway, we were always doing something adventuresome. My grandmother had a huge barn that we could play in. And we would make a rubber gun, take an old inner tube and cut it up into strips and make it like a big rubber band that big, and fashion a piece of wood, put a clothespin on the end, slip the rubber band in there, hook it around there, and when you wanted to shoot it at somebody, you simply squeeze the clothespin and the rubber band
Flings at them?
flew off. Well, we loved to go into my grandmother's big barn and crawl all over the barn, all over the hayloft and everything, having rubber gun fights. And they didn't really hurt you, but boy, it might sting a little bit.
Wait, was there any cows in that barn?
Oh yes, there were cows in the barn.
You hid behind the cows.
Oh, we would play around the cows, yes.
But did any one of them go on a rampage because they got
no.
hit?
No,
They didn't
I can
get.
tell you about the cows.
They were calm.
My father milked at one time probably 40 cows, 2 times a day.
What the?
That's right.
After the cows were milked, they left the barn and they walked down a lane into the pasture where they spent the day eating grass. That evening, when it was time for them to be milked again, the cows would line up and they came marching back up the lane to the barn, and they were in the same order every night.
Whoa, that was
There was
cool.
one cow that would be the leader, and they all knew their place in line. And it was amazing. And they walked to the barn, they came in, and they each knew the stall that they were to go to. There were several stalls where they went in and we'd have some hay in the manger for them. They all knew their stall. Once in a while, a cow would try to get in another cow's stall, and they would have a big ruckus pushing and shoving because that couldn't happen. The animals were amazing. The cows somehow knew who was supposed to go first. And they also knew, I go in this stall. I kind of liken it sometimes to people in church. They go to church and this is my seat. Don't sit in my seat, you know?
Yeah.
But it was one of the interesting things about growing up around animals and watching how animals develop and some of the habits they have. You've all missed a lot by not growing up on a farm.
I've been to a land,
Yeah?
and I got to shoot a BB gun and a .22 caliber. It was in a land that my grandpa owned.
Where was your house and land from here?
Where was it from here? Well, do you know where 86th Street is? Yeah. My uncle owned the grocery store that used to be on the corner of 86th and Parallel. Our property was halfway towards State Avenue, and then went east or west. At one time, my grandfather had owned just about that whole section from 90th Street, where Providence Hospital is, back to 86th, State. When I was little, State Avenue wasn't there.
And now it is there.
Well, I watched them build State Avenue, and I can tell you stories about that for a long time, because my grandmother had a big farmhouse up on the hill with a big barn, and a lot of the work on State Avenue was done with horse-drawn equipment. And so the drovers, as they called them, rented my grandmother's barn and kept horses and mules there at night. And after a day's work, they would drive their mules and horses up the hill and take the harness off and feed them in my grandma's barn. My grandma also rented rooms for some of the workers because they would be in one location for quite some time. It was very slow building it with horse-drawn equipment, graders and the like. So that was something else that was a real experience for me, is watching all of that take place and I was really quite small then. My grandmother, after we were finished with that, she used to rent rooms to teachers who taught right here at White Church School. And she offered board and room. She would cook meals for them and offer them a room to live in. And so by the time I came to school here, I had gotten acquainted with some of the teachers that were right here at White Church School. So what do you think? Any more questions?
Anyone got a question?
I do. When you were all grown up, what was your job?
When I was all grown up, what was my job? Well, I'll tell you. And I could spend a lot of time talking about that. I was so anxious to find a job and make a living that I took a job in a factory that was not a really great job, but it was a job. And I have to tell you, and this won't mean anything to you, it might mean something to Mrs. Dennis. My starting pay when I went to work was 95 cents an hour. And we were working 70 hours a week. 7 10-hour days.
Wait, you worked
And
7-10?
So, well, suddenly I was wealthy because I worked 40 hours